Hi everybody, Erin Quintas here from Mama Baron blog over at WordPress. Wanted to welcome you today to my laboratory of Mama Rehab, also known as my garage gym. And I wanted to show you guys today my most recent science project, which may appear to be the work of a crazy person, but I hope it will help illustrate one of the concepts of Mama Rehab that I want to talk to you about, which is the abdomen as a pressure system. So hopefully this will help me illustrate and explain how your abdomen is actually a pressure system. So let me go ahead and explain my model here. Up here, this condom up here, we have representing the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is a muscle, a huge muscle that sits under your lungs. And when you breathe, the diaphragm actually goes down in order to increase chest space to suck air into you. And when it comes back up, that actually enables you to exhale. Okay, so this is going to actually represent the diaphragm, and this down here, this flexi condom down here, is actually going to represent the pelvic floor, which is the hammock of muscles in your crotch, basically the hammock of muscles between your legs that holds your internal organs in. So this is the top of your abdominal cavity up here, and this is the bottom of your abdominal cavity down here. And in the middle here, we have these lovely and accurate six-pack muscles. And in the middle of them, which we'll get to a little bit later, is this kind of not very strong piece right here, which is actually going to represent our linea alba for those mamas who have diastasis recti. So I'll explain for those of us who have diastasis recti what effect the abdominal pressure system has on your linea alba. So let me just go ahead and get started. But before I do, I just want to say that this isn't 100% accurate, as all models are. Your abdomen is not filled with air, rather it is filled with a bunch of internal organs, but the pressure system is going to work the same way on air as it would your guts. If I tried to put guts in here, I think we'd have a mess. So I'm just going to show you with air. You don't have air in your abdominal cavity. This is just a model. So the abdominal pressure system is a huge concept to understand in order to rehab mama stuff really well. So what I'm going to do is model breathing for you with this wonderful model that I have here. So every time you breathe, like I was talking about, this diaphragm, this guy up here comes down. So every time you breathe, the diaphragm goes down in order to create space up here in your thoracic cavity. So deep breath. What's actually happening down here in the pelvic floor region is it is accommodating the increase in pressure in your abdominal cavity. So every time that diaphragm goes down, it squishes everything that's below it in this abdominal cavity, and your pelvic floor, thank goodness, drops a little in order to accommodate that increase in pressure. So every time you breathe in, that pelvic floor down there is dropping down a little bit to take the increase in pressure off of your internal organs. So let me just show you one area of dysfunction that happens for some moms that can affect your rehab. So one thing that moms are told constantly is to kegel, kegel, kegel. And I am all for kegling. Kegling can increase your pelvic floor strength, and that can be a wonderful thing. And for a lot of moms, kegling and increasing pelvic floor strength can actually decrease their leaking, and they may not have any more symptoms. But a strong pelvic floor and a good kegel don't necessarily mean you're not going to leak. You can kegel really well all the time, and you can have a really strong pelvic floor and you can still leak, and let me explain why. So let's talk about this abdominal system again, this pressure system. So let's say that you're one of those people who's like, I'm going to kegel all day long, and maybe I'm going to hold a kegel all the way through my run or my workout, or maybe even just all day long I'm going to hold a kegel because I don't want any liquid to come out. It's going to be like a brick wall. So let's represent that by not letting that pelvic floor come down. So let's say that you take a deep breath all day long, which hopefully you're doing. Your diaphragm is going to come down when you're breathing, and it's going to put pressure on this abdominal cavity. And the difference is going to be the pressure is not going to be absorbed by your pelvic floor. So if that pressure isn't being absorbed by your pelvic floor, what's happening is all that pressure is just staying on your internal organs, one of which is your bladder. So the bladder is essentially a sac that holds liquid, and it actually has a liquid escape route. So if you put a ton of pressure on your bladder all day long when you breathe, there is an escape route and the liquid will escape because there's an incredible amount of pressure on your bladder. So for those of you who hold Kegels and Kegel all day long, your pelvic floor may be very strong, which is great. But if it's not moving in coordination with your diaphragm, you can still leak. And the reason is you're not allowing that pelvic floor to come down and accommodate the pressure that's being put on your system by your diaphragm. So that's just one example of dysfunction. And now let me talk a little bit about how pelvic floor dysfunction can actually hurt your diastasis recti or affect your diastasis recti. I was actually told by one of my doctors early on that my pelvic floor injuries were in no way related directly to my diastasis recti, and that's just not true, and I want to show you why. So let's talk about that same situation. Let's say you're one of those people who hasn't coordinated your diaphragm and your pelvic floor when you're breathing. Let me show you what happens when that pelvic floor doesn't come down in conjunction with that diaphragm when you're breathing. So watch the linea alba right here, which is that thing, that tissue that we want to come back together and be much stronger. So watch what happens to that tissue when your diaphragm goes down and your pelvic floor does not. So you see the incredible amount of pressure on your linea alba when your diaphragm comes down, and you're breathing all day long. So if these two things aren't coordinated, that's an incredible amount of pressure on this tissue that's already been stretched out to the max, and we need to protect and have come back together and challenge in the correct way. That's just an intro to some of the dysfunction that happens with the abdominal system when we don't coordinate these things, these players, the diaphragm, the abdomen, and the pelvic floor. When we don't coordinate those things, this pressure system can become pretty messed up and really cause a lot of symptoms related to diastasis recti and the pelvic floor. So hopefully that's a good illustration so that you can kind of see an introduction to why it's so important to breathe properly and stand properly and have proper alignment in order to facilitate mama rehab healing. So I'm going to include a bunch of links about piston breathing. It's an idea I got from Julie Wiebe. I'm going to include a bunch of her videos in the bottom, so please watch those in addition to this. They're really helpful. The general idea behind piston breathing is this is my diaphragm right here, this is my pelvic floor. When I breathe in, the diaphragm needs to come down, the pelvic floor needs to come down. When I breathe out, they both need to come back up. And that's just naturally what needs to happen in order to facilitate and to coordinate the pressure in your abdomen really well. So that's just an introduction to this and just one explanation of how dysfunction can inhibit healing for moms. So hopefully that's helpful. Please comment with questions and comments. Thanks.